Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk about the steps and strategies that are needed to analyze poetry. We're also going to discuss what it means to analyze poetry and move towards writing, like analytical paragraph writing. And so there's going to be a combination of both. Oftentimes, analyzing and understanding poetry can be rather overwhelming simply because poetry is difficult to understand. There's a lot of metaphors, there's a lot of similes, there's a lot of abstract thinking that happens. And so when we analyze poetry, we kind of need to go through some steps so that we fully understand what's happening. So we fully understand what the poet is trying to communicate. What's that message we're supposed to walk away with when we are done reading or listening to the poem? So today, we're going to go through some steps. If you have not set up a Google Doc yet entitled it Analyzing Poetry, please do so. You can stop the video at any time so that you can catch up and follow along. But anything that I'm writing down here and modeling for you, you'll need to do the same for your own poems so that you can understand and begin to pull it apart and analyze and figure out what's going on for your writing. Okay? So when we analyze poetry, we're going to look at a lot of different things. Today, I'm going to look at, I'm going to use the poem To Autumn by John Keats. It's a fantastic poem that identifies the changing of seasons, moving from summer into fall. It's got a lot of imagery in here. It's one of my favorite poems. I'm going to use this one as an example of kind of how, as we go through these different steps. So looking here, we've got, and I'm going to go back and forth, we've got analyzing poetry. The very first thing that we need to do, ladies and gentlemen, is we need to read through the poem several times, okay? When we read through the poem several times, we are able to hear words and rhythm. We're able to hear the rhyming pattern. We are able to get a better sense of what happens and what the content is. Okay. Now, we read through the poem several times because if we read it through once, a lot of us, that's where we give up. We read through it and we go over here, seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load and bless with fruit the vines that round the thatch eaves run to bend the, like already there's a lot going on. You can kind of see like, okay, they're talking about nature and like the sun. Okay, great. But if we don't read through the entire thing multiple times, we're not going to get a sense. We need to be familiar with it. Okay. Just like if you watch a movie once, you kind of understand the story. But if you watch it multiple times, you pick up on different things as the story progresses. So looking here, I would even actually recommend is to read through the poem several times, or you can also listen. Here we go. Come on. Listen to an audio version of the poem. Okay. Sometimes poems are meant to be heard and not necessarily read. If you go through Shakespeare's sonnets, some of them are written as letters. Some of them are written as speeches. And so you kind of have to listen as well. So one of the easiest ways to do this is simply to go to YouTube and type in your poetry title, as well as, audio or audio recording, and something should come up. Okay. You'll notice here for this, I'm on poetryfoundation.org. Not only do they have poems and poets and a bunch of other items, they also have places where you can listen to the poems. So people will read it out so that you are, you can process through by listening to it. Okay. So that's the very first thing we're going to do. We're going to read through the poem multiple times. All right. The second thing that we are going to do, is we are going to write a summary. Okay. Now, this summary can either be after every stanza. This could be after the entire poem in itself. This gives us an idea of, okay, they talked about nature. We're talking about the season of autumn. They're talking about, in this paragraph, let's see, it says to bend with apples, to swell the gourd, to plump the hazel shells with sweet kernel. It sounds like everything is kind of blossoming or coming to fruition. Okay, something is building. Later, flowers for the bees, so there's pollination, until they think warm days will never cease, for summer has o'er-brimmed their clammy cells. So even right here, we're noticing that there's kind of a completion. So off to the side, I would write down things as the seasons are changing, right? The fruit in the farm, the orchard are all at its peak, the very height. Flowers are being pollinated by the bees, and the days are no longer as warm as they used to be. Okay. So that is a small summary of what happens. If you are able to write a summary, and this can be after every stanza or after the entire poem, okay? If you do that, you're able to kind of sit back and be like, okay, this is what the poem's really about, and know the summary, know the substance of what we're studying, okay? So analyzing poetry, we've got two first things, very basic. Read through the poem several times, listen to an audio version if that's available. The second one is you're going to write a summary, okay? What is that poem actually about, all right? Number 3, the very third thing, what we're going to do is we are going to circle, and these are annotation tools that I use, but you can use an identifying mark that's best for you. Circle any form of rhyme, okay? This could be end rhyme, where the words at the very end of the line begin to make a pattern. This could be internal rhyme. So this could be words in the center of the line that make a pattern. There's also assonance, which is in the center of a word, not necessarily the entire word itself. It's in the rhyming part happens in the center. There's also consonants, which is another form of writing with a consonant vowel. And you make that mark. And again, that's kind of inside of the word. These two are a little bit trickier. However, starting with end rhyme or internal rhyme will help you create that pattern. So these are all the different types. I'm going to come up over here. Seasons of mist and mellow fruitfulness, close bosom friend of the maturing sun, conspiring with him how to load the bless. So already I've noticed an end pattern. You've got ness from fruitfulness, and you've got bless. So that's another one right there. So I would identify that. I've got sun and run. That's my other pattern that I have. So I'm going to begin to select, well, there's definitely end rhyme to my poem. Okay. If I was going to go for internal rhyme, somewhere in the middle of the rhyme, in the lines, I'd look for things like mist, maturing. Already I've got this M sound. M for mist, mellow, maturing, right? Let's see, bosom, friend, maturing, load, bless. I'm going to read it out loud so I can hear those patterns. The blend with apples, that mossed cottage trees. So the ah sound in mossed cottage, right? That's one. The round. I'm already finding the connections. So by doing this, I'm able to identify, okay, inside, there's something else that's happening. And right now it may not make sense, but the goal is to figure it out, right? Part of analyzing is pulling things apart and seeing how they work. So if right now we're pulling apart the rhyme. What is the rhyme of this? It's definitely noticeable, like run, you've got bless, and then trees, but that rhymes with the shells. So you got the S sound in there. Shells, bees, cease. Okay. You're beginning to pick up on how are these things connecting. All right. Now, after we circle and form a rhyme, whether it be internal, external, assonance, consonants, whichever, we are going to annotate the figurative language. Okay, annotate the figurative language. This can be, imagery. Now, if you don't know what imagery is not making an image. Point that out right now. Imagery deals with the 5 senses. Okay, taste, touch, smell, hear, sight, and sound. Okay, you pick up on those 5 senses based upon the things that are said. So they create an image, but imagery is not the image that's projected. So understand the difference. You use the 5 senses to convey that image. So maybe you're going to look for imagery. Okay. There's also, let's say, like metaphors. Okay. Similes. Similes is, and metaphors is a comparison. So similes use the terms like or as. So your room is like a pigsty. So that's a simile. All right. A metaphor is connecting those in the same. You're comparing things, right? Life goes by just as a sentence does. Okay. You're connecting things. You're making those, but in a metaphorical way. It's not literal. It's metaphorical, right? He literally ate a horse. No, he metaphorically ate a horse, unless he's on a farm eating horse. But we're not going to talk about that. Okay. So personification is another one. Okay, personification is another term. That's where non-human items are given human-like traits. Okay, fumbled over my words. That's where something comes to life, right? Using those terms. So if you remember back to Lord of the Flies, we had talked about the fire had personification where it scurried like a squirrel and gnawed up of the tree. Those are human-like traits that are given to a non-human object. Okay. So annotate the figurative language. If I'm looking at my poem right here, let's go down to the second stanza. We haven't looked at the second stanza yet. It says, "Who hath not seen thee oft amid thy store? Sometimes whoever seeks abroad may find thee sitting careless on the grainy floor, thy soft lifted by the willowing wind, of the half-reaped fury sound asleep." Okay, a lot of this is talking about sleeping and being in the barn. Drowse the fume of poppies. So that right there would be imagery, the smell of poppies, the perfume that's given off by these flowers. Okay, the twine flowers, and sometimes like a greener here means one who gathers remaining food. Okay, is kept. The cider press. That's where you would make like apple juice or apple cider. You would take the apples or whatever fruit you're going and you grind them down. You'd press them down to get all of the juice out. Okay, that watches the last oozing hours by hours. The hours, it would be the dripping of the juice from the apples or the pears or whatever fruit that you are pressing. Okay, so right there, I've got 2 items that I can pick up on. Right? I might even, for grainy floor, pick up on the touch. The floor is probably covered in hay or dirt or small, like gravel. And so maybe that's something that I would be able to touch. Even if I scoot along it with my shoes, I might be able to hear the gravel moving or shifting. Okay. So what are those songs of spring? Think of them not. Their music too. So here now I'm going to auditory. This is the imagery that's being used for sound. So the touch. Oh, look at this. So what's the music that I hear? Barred clouds bloom in the soft dying day. The touch of stubble panes. Stubble panes means the fields made up of stubble, the remaining stumps of grains after they've been reaped. Okay. The river shallows. So you're getting to have a sense, a feel based upon your 5 senses, and therefore that's the imagery that's being projected. Okay. So when I look for annotating and I'm annotating based upon all these items, I'm going to circle them and label them. So I would go over here and I would circle, put a specific mark for the specific one of the five senses that I'm using. So if I'm going to have, let's see, the full-grown lambs, loud bleat. Okay, so we've got lambs that are bleating, making noise. I'd probably off to the side over here mark down the sounds of baby sheep, right? The sounds of lambs. And that's my auditory imagery right there, okay? Hedge crickets sing. You can hear crickets in the background. So already I've got a lot of sounds. There's the red breast whistles, so the red-breasted raven or sparrow, okay? That would be another bird that I hear. So there's 3 different sounds that I have right here. There's a lot of noise happening in this very last stanza on the farm, okay? So I want to annotate that. I want to mark those down. I want to highlight, circle, however I'm going to mark it up and make notes off to the side so that I'm able to come back to it later and know, oh, this paragraph's talking about sound, okay, or whichever. Now, number five is where you begin to identify and explain what the speaker is trying to communicate, okay? Here's a message, right? What's the message? What is the message that the poet or the speaker is trying to communicate? So if I'm looking at To Autumn, I'm understanding that this poem is actually in reference, like kind of like an ode, or not an eulogy, that's where someone dies, but an ode is like where you're kind of pronouncing the greatness of something, okay? So like an ode to life, you know, and it's a catchy little phrase or whatever. An ode to autumn is the idea that this is saying, autumn, this is what I admire about you. The seasons change. We're in between summer and fall, and things are changing and moving. And here's how I see that happening. So already I can tell, if I'm looking at number 5, identify and explain what the speaker is trying to communicate. What's the message? The message is that we are talking about fall, and we are talking about that transition time, okay? The transition time, autumn, when everything changes, right? So you've got this first part where everything is ripening, getting to its peak right before the harvest. Then you're talking about this second part where things kind of get lazy and you kind of rest. And it says the half-reaped sound asleep. So the guy who was out there working in the fields is kind of taking a nap and he's tired, right? So this idea of growing. This second stanza is like more restful. There's a patient look. They're looking on to something delicious in the cedar press. They're like, that might be good. And then low down here below, it's the kind of idea of, oh my gosh, are we now in this next phase, right? Are we here where things are dying off? Are we here where we hear the wailful choir of the gnats mourn among the river shot? Like, are we hearing all of this noise towards the end of the season? Okay. So even the swallows twitter in the skies. So even the sound. So this first one is a lot of visual imagery, right? This second one is probably the feel or the taste, because we are feeling the poppies, the smell of the perfume, the grainy floor, the cider press, biting into an apple and having the juices all run down your hand and your mouth. And then you have over here where it's like a lot of noise, things are changing, things are kind of almost done and dying off. So already I can tell for this question for number 5, what is the message? The message is that there is some sort of transition or change. I'm going to make the assumption that we are going from all of these different imagery things, almost like the idea of life, from transitioning from one to the next, right? You are transitioning from your past grade to your future grade. You are in a year of transition, okay? To imagine transitioning from high school to college, or college to real life. And so our poet here is talking about the transition of life in autumn. So everything begins to change, right? Summertime's over, the sun sets earlier, things are budding, blossoming, dying off, getting ready for winter. And so there's this natural move. So if I'm going to write anything down, I'm going to write down and explain how the speaker's trying to communicate that there is change, that there is transition, that there is, we have to understand that things not only stay the same, but our senses pick up on how the natural movement of seasons occur. Okay. The more I write for this, the easier my analytical paragraph writing will be. So if you write down the message is transition, great. Our goal is, what does that mean? What does it mean to transition? What does it embody for us to move? Like, sure, you switch, but also that takes your mind, your feelings. It takes the idea of moving forward into something that is new, yet the same. And so explain yourself thoroughly. Okay. The next component after that actually ties in, because number 6 is find textual evidence. Find textual evidence for what the speaker or poet is saying. Okay. What is it about that transition? What is it about the movement from one item to the next? So if I look at my poem, I've got over here, I would find some textual evidence like to swell the gourd, to plump the hazel shells. That is an example. That is an example of how things change, right? I would identify also warmer days will never cease. Like we kind of get into that idea that summertime will always be summertime until we realize that the sun sets and it gets cooler at nights, and then we begin to move into fall and winter. So looking at those components, you want to find a piece of textual evidence. So if the poet is trying to communicate that there are the 5 senses being used, I'm going to give textual evidence about how the cider press happens and the farm worker is looking at it, waiting very patiently for that glass of apple juice after a long day in the field. Okay. I'm going to mark that down because that's going to be textual evidence to help support what I'm saying. All right. The last item that we have, and we've done a lot so far, is to clearly identify and explain the poem's message. Okay. Now, this will relate back to number 5. But now that you have textual evidence, you're able to write in your analytical commentary right here. Okay. I'm going to mark down that this is analytical commentary. Okay. So this is the bigger item. Looking at this poem, a lot of people have identified that this sure talks about nature, but it also talks about the cycle of life. The idea of first being a child and growing and maturing, right? Then getting to a place where you work all the time and you're a little bit slower and you're looking for patience. Then it talks about the end of your life, those last years where you are reminiscing about everything that has happened. So even some people have identified, sure, this talks about nature and this talks about seasons and it uses imagery, but it can also reference to life. How do us in life go from one season to the next? How do you go from being dependent, being a dependent kid in high school to a functioning independent adult, right? There's a transition that happens. And so looking at Keats's poem, we are going through that transition. So down here at the very bottom, I would identify that is part of it as well. The senses, the transition of seasons all connects to life. And this is how life transitions as well. Okay. So there's a lot to this. It's not as simple as let me read a poem and let me explain what it's about. Follow these steps and they will help guide you to get to the analytical thing. And again, the more that you pull apart and the more that you jot down and write down, the more you will have to pull from when you do your writing. Okay. So let me review real quick. You read through the poem several times, listen to it if you can. You write a summary either after every stanza or at the bottom. You circle any form of rhyme, end rhyme, internal rhyme. Where is the rhyme pattern? And what is the significance of that rhyme pattern? Okay. Annotate figurative language. So you're looking for similes, you're looking for imagery, you're looking for metaphors, you're looking for personification. One of the things, like there's Emily Dickinson, she's a great poet. And one of the things that she does is she capitalizes specific letters in her poetry to mean certain things. So that would be something that I would annotate because it's unique and different. Okay. Number 5 is where you identify and explain what the speaker's trying to communicate. So what's that message that you get after you found the rhyme and the figurative language? Okay. From there, you find textual evidence to support what's being said. And then you can come to, is there a bigger message, right? let me put that in right here. I clearly identify and explain the poem's bigger message. What is the biggest, what's the takeaway? For me as a listener or reader of poetry, what am I walking away with that's going to be unique and different? Okay. And that's where you're going to begin to write your analytical commentary. Okay. Now, piecing these things together, if you look at your body, if you look at your analytical paragraphs, you always look for 2 things. One thing that you focus on first and foremost is what's the poet's or author's purpose or message. Okay, and that's what we did for number 5 and we did for number 7. And then the other component that you do is what is the literary element that's used to communicate that message, right? What is that literary element? Is this a metaphor? Is it a simile? Right now, To Autumn is a metaphor for life, right? This poem articulates the 3 stages of life: childhood, adulthood, and being like an elder, right? Or a senior citizen, whatever term, old person, right? It's identifying that To Autumn is a metaphor, okay? So when you piece these things together, keep in the back of the mind that you're doing your writing. So that's why pulling all of this apart is going to be beneficial, okay? But then also using it purposefully so that you can write your analytical paragraphs and write them well, okay? Take the time to go to your poem. Remember, you're going to select one poem and you're going to analyze that one poem and then conduct the analytical paragraph writing for it, okay? Please message me, email me if you have any questions or concerns. Hopefully this is a fun activity for you because you get to kind of invest in your piece of poetry. The other thing that I would probably recommend, ladies and gentlemen, is for you to look up, because you're looking at poetry in a holistic sense. Where is our author from? What's the culture that goes along with it? Where do those components come in within the poetry? What the time period in which it's written? So look at those factors too, especially if you are looking at number 5 and looking at number 7. Those items as well may play into what the poem's message is. Okay. Once again, email me if you have any questions or concerns. Have fun with this. It's a good one. Talk to you later, guys. Bye.